was a terrible day for them.
Shall we, do you want to crack on?
Yeah. Fire away, yeah.
Shall we, go ahead, I'll introduce you first. This is Spencer Carli. It is Carli, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep, that's correct.
And Spencer has very kindly agreed to talk to us today about using Meteor for as a backend viewer. And maybe Spencer, give us a kind of brief bio of yourself before we start. Just so we get some idea of where you're coming from.
Yeah, so I'm a developer with a company called Differential, who's based in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is a few hours north of me. And basically, the purpose of the company I work with is, to remove barriers to growth for whatever company we're working with. And I help on the side of software development. So if there's a software need, that's kind of where I play in. And yeah, so my two primary technologies are React Native and Meteor. I've been using React Native for like a year and a half now. So basically 2 weeks after they made that public release. And then I've been using Meteor for at least 3 years. I started when I was interning with Differential years and years ago. And I still use it every day on the app that I was working on up until about 15 minutes ago. So that's kind of my tech background and my work background.
Cool, that's great. Thanks very much.
Let me start sharing my screen. Okay. All right, can you guys see my slides?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so yeah, I basically just went through who I am, developer, and I've been doing this a few years now. And yeah, so what I want to talk about today is just using Meteor as a backend. As I said before, I've been using React Native for the last year and a half in association with Meteor. So basically, I haven't used Meteor as in the normal way, whatever that means. So what we'll just talk about today is, basic overview of Meteor in case anyone hasn't used it before. Just cover some benefits and drawbacks of the actual platform. And then just some instances where you might want to use Meteor purely on the server. And then just some examples of how, if you just want to use it on the server, like what's that actually look like in practice? So what's Meteor? It's a super fast way to build JavaScript apps. One command and you've got, the full stack. You've got client, you've got your server, you've got your database, all of that set up for you. From saying Meteor create my app. And another thing, which I guess has been around a few years now, is you can actually build a mobile app from Meteor, and that's happening via Cordova. And again, just like everything else with Meteor, that happens super fast. And then lastly, well, two last things, is the database Meteor uses is MongoDB, which is NoSQL. It's document-based. It's pretty simple to get started with. And then finally is Meteor works over DDP, which is the Distributed Data Protocol, which actually goes back and forth between the client and the server over WebSockets. Okay, so now that we've kind of got an idea of how Meteor works, what are some benefits of it? Well, first off, as I said before, it's super fast to get started with. You got one command, Meteor create my app, and you got a full-fledged app. You don't have to worry about DevOps on the development side anymore. You can just go ahead and start working on actually building your app, which is one of my favorite parts for me, because when I'm working on something, I want to go and actually build the product rather than kind of build up my development environment. And then going along those lines is user accounts. Meteor's got user accounts built right in. You just, much like Meteor create, you just say Meteor add, accounts password, accounts Google. So you've got basic email password, user accounts, you've got Google OAuth, Twitter OAuth, and all of that you get nearly for free. It's super simple to get started with. Third, we've got MongoDB, and I kind of discussed this before, but it works really well for the kind of the high-speed environment that Meteor allows you to develop with. You don't have to worry about writing a data migration to kind of add new fields to a SQL database. You can just kind of iteratively build up on MongoDB. And then there's also some benefits that make the real-time component easier for MDG, which is the Meteor Development Group, to actually build in the real-time defaults that Meteor has. And then, yeah, lastly, is Meteor's real-time by default, and this was kind of their big selling point 2 or 3 years ago. And that's using the Meteor pub subsystem, which publish, subscribe. So you're able to, publish a piece of data like a Mongo cursor, and that data will be passed in real time back and forth between the clients. So the client theoretically will always have the most up-to-date data without them having to refresh it, or without you having to manually push down data or have the client fetching new data behind the scenes. So with drawbacks, with every benefit, there's going to be some drawback. And one of the things that makes Meteor so fast to get started with is how much it actually handles. And as you start working with an app for, I worked on an app last year for about probably 15 months. And over time, like the magic of Meteor kind of starts to get in the way. And that's because of the size of the tool. They're handling building and compiling your client code, the same for your server, managing your database connection. So it's a really big tool, and sometimes it kind of gets in the way, especially as you work on it for a long time and when you've got a team of like 10 developers working on it. Second, and this is the biggest pushback we've had on a few of our clients who aren't like brand new startups but have like existing products, and that's that Meteor, you can't really implement it incrementally. You have to basically go all or nothing. At least that's the way it used to be. I'll talk about how you can kind of work around that. But because it touches the server, the database, and the client, you need full stack buy-in. And then lastly, as I said, on benefits, you've got real-time by default. And it sounds awesome, but being real-time, like there are going to be drawbacks. It takes more work from the computer side, from a memory perspective, to have this real-time piece. And I don't want to go too far into it, but basically the way Meteor Pub Sub works and the way it's able to constantly keep the client up to date with the latest data is it remembers exactly what that client has basically in their own client cache. So, if you imagine you've got 1,000 connected clients, that server needs to remember 1,000 different clients, local, basically database. And that's going to get kind of expensive. So it can be a downfall there as you start to scale the product up. Okay, so that's Meteor. When would you actually want to use Meteor exclusively as the back end of your app? So kind of getting rid of that full stack buy-in side of things. First up, let's say you've got a native mobile app. Maybe your team is just super familiar with Objective-C or Swift for iOS or Java for Android. And you guys already have that team, that skill set, whatever it may be, and you want to, take advantage of that. You don't want to have to take on that learning curve of learning JavaScript, of using Cordova, all of that stuff. And then also, you might just have an existing native app. I guess it was maybe 6 to 9 months ago, Parse.com announced that they're going to shut down. So let's say you built your native iOS app and your native Android app, and you use Parse.com as the backend for that, backend as a service. And if they're shutting down, you have to figure out what you're going to do about your backend. And in that instance, maybe Meteor is going to be the right choice for you. So you want to continue to use the client apps that you've worked on for months, years, whatever it may be, but you need to transition the back end of your app. That's one instance you might want to use Meteor exclusively as the back end. And then again, just kind of going along that line of familiarity of tools you're working with. Maybe you've got experience with Grunt, Gulp, Bower, or now Webpack, and you want to continue to use those tools. It's perfectly understandable because, and frankly, like those tools are better than what Meteor provides on the client side. And then along those lines, like you've also got more flexibility because you've got so many different people working on it that handles a smaller use case. There's going to be more flexibility involved in that. And also, when you start to focus on things, smaller and smaller things, like there's going to be a bigger, more dedicated community around that one piece of technology. And that's going to allow you to, have faster improvements and just better quality in general. So, if you want to use a certain set of front-end tools and those don't work with Meteor by default, or you just don't want to deal with the Meteor client side and kind of possibly working around that, might be an instance of using Meteor exclusively as the backend of your app. And then I'm super, super passionate about React Native, so I had to drop it in here. But let's say you want to use React Native to build your iOS and your Android app in JavaScript. React Native doesn't work by default with the Meteor client build tool, so you're going to have to figure out a way to work around that. And like I said, I've been using React Native and Meteor in this way together for the last 1.5 years, and I've been super, super happy with it. And yeah, every app I've been building since then has used the same stack of React Native plus Meteor. So yeah, now that we kind of have a few instances of when you would want to use React, or when you would want to use Meteor and some different client, how do you actually pass that data back and forth, and what's that whole process look like? So you've got 3 different ways that you can approach this. First one is DDP, which, as I said before, is the distributed data protocol. That works over WebSockets. That was kind of developed and standardized, or the spec was written for it by the Meteor development group for the purposes of Meteor. And within DDP, and we've got 2 different ways you can pass data back and forth. And that's the publish subscribe method, pub sub, and then also Meteor methods, or just methods over DDP. Next up, you can also just pass things back and forth via REST. If you're using something like React Native, it's got the fetch API in there, which just makes working with a REST API super simple. And then finally is Apollo/GraphQL, which is where I'm looking in the future, and where I think a lot of other people are looking in the future, as we've seen with GitHub recently announcing that they've got a GraphQL API that's either live or coming up soon. So those are the 3 ways we can kind of share data back and forth between a Meteor server and some other client. Okay, so what's it look like using DDP? As I said before, we've got pub sub, we've got methods. So let's see, first up, this would be on your Meteor app, so the server in this instance. And first up in the top left, we can see what it would look like to put together a publication in the pub sub model. And if you used Meteor at all, this probably looks really familiar to you. You're going to name your publication, in this case it's posts, and then from there we're going to return a Mongo cursor. At that point, then Meteor server knows whenever a client subscribes to this posts publication, it's going to go ahead and pass that data along to the client. And then down here in the bottom right, we've got a Meteor method. And depending on how you've used Meteor in the past, this might look a little different to you, because typically you would pass data between client and server via a publication rather than a method. So in this case, everything's basically the same. It's just we would, call or get the data from this method rather than subscribe to it with a publication. And then since we're not using DDP in this instance, or the DDP publication, the way all of that works, we can't actually pass along the cursor, because it won't automatically convert that for us. So this .fetch is basically just going to turn that cursor into an array to pass just an array of data down to the client. So let's say, we've got, first we'll look at the subscribed version of this. Let's say you've got this publication on the server and you want to subscribe to that data. I'm going to use an example, as I do with React Native, just because that's where I'm really familiar and actually working. So yeah, there's a great package called React Native Meteor, which is basically, it builds API parity between a package you can install on React Native and, knowing how to communicate with the Meteor server over DDP. And so this is all going to be React based. It might look strange if you're not familiar, but basically what we're doing here is, we had that meteor.publish posts, and what we want to do here is meteor.subscribe posts. And when this component is mounted, this create container is called. It's going to set up that subscription. So at that point, the server knows about our client. It knows that our client wants this posts data. And as soon as that subscribe is made, that data will start being sent down to the client. And then here, this is just kind of the way you would fetch that data. So meteor.collection posts, and posts aligns with the actual Mongo collection name. And yeah, this is using a package called mini Mongo on the client side. So you can actually query data quite similarly on the client as you would on the server. So that's what's happening here. Since we're using Meteor's pub sub model here, any updates to the post collection, so say the author changes the title of a post, that'll be pushed down to this connected client, and however you handle that update, that new title will then be shown to the connected client. So that's the pub sub model if you're going to use Meteor as the backend, and in this case React Native as the client connecting over Meteor's pub sub model. So hopefully you guys can see this, but this is if you're going to fetch that data over a Meteor method, and it might look a little bit more verbose here, but basically same thing. We're just gonna call that meteor.call posts.all, which is what we defined here. And yeah, as we saw from that, we're going to return an array. And at that point, rather than the data just kind of being put into Meteor collection that React Native Meteor is handling, you're going to have to go ahead and handle that result, be it storing it directly in component state like I'm doing here, or passing that along to Redux, or however else you're handling your client-side data. So that's what we've got going on here, and much like the positive result, you can also handle your error in whatever way and pass that into your state. So, and then yeah, the only other difference here, other than being a little bit more verbose, is this data isn't going to be real time. It's basically like once the server sends that data, it sends it. It's got no idea of what the client knows, what it doesn't know. So it's much more like fetching data over REST. It's essentially like a one and done operation. Okay, so that would be if we're just using DDP via pub sub or Meteor methods. The other option is REST, and this is the way the app I've been working on for 6 months now. This is how we're handling data now, and we're passing it along via REST. Number of reasons for that, mostly to work with external clients and let kind of partners of the company that we're building this app for actually access different pieces of data, because not that many people actually know what DDP is, or have the infrastructure in place to actually communicate with that method. So yeah, if you want to use REST in your Meteor app to get data to a client, there's a few different possibilities. First up is REST of us, which is a very simple way to define REST endpoints. There's simple REST, which I think is actually developed and maintained by an MDG member, which is Meteor Development Group, who actually builds Meteor. And And then finally, the most low-level way, and if you're familiar with, defining routes with something like Express, simple JSON routes is going to be very, very familiar to you, and actually how you define your endpoints. So looking at this, we've got an idea of what a REST server is going to look like in Meteor. In the top left, you'll see that that publication is exactly the same as what we said before. The only difference here is that we've added the simple REST package. And what simple REST is going to do is go ahead and take all of our publications, all of our methods, and automatically make REST endpoints for them. Same if you got any security in place, all of those security measures are still going to apply when you have simple REST installed and it's setting up your REST endpoints. So publication, super, super simple. When we get down to the bottom right, it gets a little bit more complex when you're using Meteor methods. And the reason for that is simple REST by default is going to make all Meteor methods available either by post or put, which is the HTTP, the REST verb for that. And basically all I want to do here, since I'm fetching data, is I'm just going to say that this post.all Meteor method should be available over REST via GET rather than post or put, whatever that default is. So you can see here, if you're familiar with Meteor methods or Meteor pub sub, setting up REST endpoints to go alongside all of those. This is actually really, really simple to do. And yeah, if you've used REST endpoints before, you're probably familiar with this, but right here, we're going to go ahead and just use the fetch API to actually go ahead and fetch that response, fetch that data from the server. And we can see here, really the only thing, and the documentation for simple REST says this, but all of your publications, those are going to be prefixed at the API by the publications string in the actual URL. And then the final parameter is going to be the actual name of the publication. And yeah, so right here we can see, again, like we saw when we were using React Native Meteor, where we had to say meteor.collection posts to get data. Here in the response we're getting from this automatically generated publication REST endpoint, since we can return multiple types of data from the server from different collections, we can go ahead, what we'll have to do here, I should say, is say data.posts, because data is our post is our collection name. So yeah, and again, once that happens, while using the fetch API or REST in general, you're going to have to go ahead and handle that response rather than Meteor magic, as people like to say, just kind of handling all of the data on the client side for you. And yeah, I won't go into too much here because it's essentially the exact same. But here we've got an example of if we're fetching data from what was originally a Meteor method via REST. Much like publications is prefixed, methods are prefixed by methods. And I made a bit of a typo here, but rather than this being posts, our Meteor method was posts.all, and that's what you're going to pass in the URL as posts.all. And that'll go ahead and return exactly the data you would expect normally from your Meteor method. So, okay, those are DDP, those are REST. Those are the two that I use every day. Those are the ones familiar with. But kind of looking forward to the future, we've got Apollo / GraphQL, which is what Apollo is actually built on top of. And Apollo is actually built by the Meteor development group. It's basically a new data transport layer. Essentially, like in the future, it'll probably end up replacing DDP for default Meteor apps. But that's kind of where the future's going, or where I think the future is going, just judging by the time and the resources a lot of people are investing into GraphQL and tools like Apollo. So I'll give you guys a little bit of background on GraphQL if you're not familiar. But basically, it's a single endpoint that you're always going to request data from. And the thing is, from the client, you're actually going to specify what data you want. So say, from a post, I only want the title of it and the author's first name. You can specify that, and rather than having to make a request to a posts endpoint and getting all of the data for all of the posts back, you only get that subset of data you need, which is awesome for mobile clients who may have a limited data connection or just a slow connection speed, because you're not sending any useless information over the wire. And then still going along those flexibility lines is you can go ahead and make incremental updates to your GraphQL API, and the client's never going to change because it's only ever requesting the data it needs. So I'm not doing the best job explaining this, but it's really, really, really interesting what the promises along with GraphQL are. And yeah, I guess I covered the efficiency side and the backwards compatibility. So say, over time, the post collection or a post is also going to have, comments on that document. But, an older mobile client doesn't care about comments, but maybe a new one does, and you can go ahead and update that, the GraphQL endpoint to also return comments to a client who wants that information, but you don't care about it being sent to any older client. So you're able to keep backwards compatibility as data changes and all of that. And you're also able to keep it more efficient because you're only ever sending, theoretically, the data the client actually needs. So what's it actually look like? And I realized as I was going over this presentation earlier, the screen's kind of it's a bit of an overload, but we'll start up at the top left. And basically in GraphQL, you got these things called resolvers, and that's going to resolve the data that the client actually requested. So in this case, going along with our examples, let's say a client wants to request posts, and they can do that. And since it's in our collection, we can just go ahead and return post.find.fetch. And all of this would be running in the context of like a Meteor app, just so we're all on the same page. And let's see. So basically with GraphQL, you need to also have a schema and the schema is going to tell the client, what data is accessible, or what data is available, how you can actually request it, and all of that. And that's kind of what we're doing here. So in this case, a post only has an ID, which is like a database ID, and the actual title of it. And those are things that the client can request. So, and hopefully this will make more sense when we actually go over the client side of things. And then, yeah, this last chunk of code, I'm not going to cover it much. But basically, that's just how we're going to set up our GraphQL endpoint. And yeah, this is all stuff that Apollo's actually documenting, and yeah, so just kind of ignore this piece. It's just a bunch of boilerplate. So yeah, let's say you've got your React Native app, and you want to fetch data from your Meteor server via GraphQL, and you're using Apollo in your app. This is kind of what it's going to look like. We covered what it looks like from DDP, like pub sub side, Meteor methods, and also REST. And you can see this is pretty similar, if not a little bit more simple, especially compared to using the fetch API. But we can see, the query, all we care about right now is getting all of the posts. So that post.find.fetch. And within there, like all the data that we actually care about is the ID and the title of a post. Like I said before, if there's comments on there, if there's a body, whatever it may be, we don't really care about that just in our post list. So we're only going to ask for those pieces of data, and and basically the server is going to, as we set up here, it's going to resolve our request so that it sends only the data we want, only the data we need down to the client. What's going on behind the scenes of this GraphQL higher order component is it's going to go ahead and make that, that fetch request so that, the data is going to be returned. And then if you're familiar with the way React works, that data that's returned from the server is going to go ahead and be passed down to our app component via props on that component. So that, I'm still learning Apollo, and I apologize if that was a little all over the place, but it's really exciting to see what Apollo is capable of, especially when you've got a much bigger app. If this is something really simple, GraphQL is not going to make sense, as we saw here. Like, there's a fair amount of boilerplate to it. But if you're going to be working on an app for 6 months and you've got to make sure all your clients are still supported, it's a great way to go ahead and handle that data transport between Meteor app and your client. So yeah, just a quick review. Let's say you're building an app and you need real time, or you're just really familiar and comfortable and you really like DDP. You can totally still use it even if you're not using the typical Meteor client. You're just going to have to go ahead and find some sort of client library or create one that knows how to communicate with DDP and kind of understands those different messages. As I'm building with React Native, I use the React Native Meteor library because it handles so much of that for me. And then also, if you're using a traditional client, or you just want to use some tools you're more comfortable with, be it Webpack, Grunt, Gulp, Bower, whatever the tools are next week, you can do all of that, and you can interact with the Meteor data with the Meteor server over a REST endpoint, which is kind of like the de facto standard right now. And yeah, if you're comfortable, being ahead of the curve, if you're really looking to the future, or you're really gung-ho about GraphQL, which I hope I didn't put you off by any confusing explanation of it, definitely check out Apollo, because I know that's something we're starting to transition to as people learn it, especially in our mobile apps, because of just the flexibility involved, and somewhat to a lesser extent the efficiency pieces of that. It's really, really exciting if you kind of go through the docs, check out the different examples and see what's actually possible when somebody who knows what they're doing is talking about it. Yeah, so thank you all for listening to me. If you've got any questions, you can tweet me. I'm at Spencer_Carli, and same on Medium. I write basically bi-weekly on more React Native, a decent amount of Meteor. And yeah, if you've got any questions there, respond to it. And yeah, just let me know your thoughts and let me know what your questions are. So thanks again.
That's great. Thank you very much. Has anyone got any questions?
You covered a lot that we haven't actually done yet with our stuff, so. It's pretty exciting to be able to actually do the REST APIs with our app. I'm already thinking how we can develop that for our stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, REST has been, in all honesty, I was kind of hesitant to go that route because it felt like it was going backwards. But yeah, as the team's starting to scale, start with just me working on this project, we've got 4 other developers now. People are more familiar with REST, and when you're working with multiple developers, it's going to be faster to work with tools people are familiar with. And then yeah, we're looking forward to using Apollo and GraphQL eventually. And I think that transition will just be a little bit easier from the REST standpoint.
Do you think that the DDP is gonna last. Just I kind of wonder whether the Meteor development group have kind of shifted focus to Apollo, and I'm kind of hoping they don't do the same thing they did with the free hosting, where they suddenly pull it, and I have this fear that there'll be this, they'll suddenly just say we're not going to support DDP anymore or publish pubs. So do you think that's likely to happen, or?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to speculate too much, but it's definitely something like we're trying, we're thinking ahead towards. Because like looking at, I don't know. I think if there's a Meteor 2.0, I wouldn't be surprised if Meteor 2.0 would drop DDP for the likes of Apollo. But I also see as Meteor 1. Whatever progresses, I think there will be like a slow and simple progression with Apollo to kind of replace DDP, because that is kind of their bread and butter. That's what they were pushing for so long, and like their Galaxy hosting services based on all of that. So I'm kind of like 50-50. I think eventually it'll be dropped, but I think like the movement forward should be relatively easy from a development standpoint, and very like incremental as that actually happens. But I have no idea what I'm actually. I don't know.
I just hope they've learned from the mistakes of the kind of the hosting announcement. It's very kind of quick, and so I guess they have done. I would hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I suppose, first of all, thanks a million, Spencer, for the talk, and really helpful. Some great information. I suppose me and these two guys are just starting out, and we're making a project for one of our computer science classes, utilizing Meteor and maybe hopefully React down the road as well. And I was just wondering, from your standpoint and with regards to learning the technologies at the very beginning, what were the best resources that you came across?
Yeah, so best resources I came across when I was learning Meteor was the book Discover Meteor. I don't know how updated that is anymore, but like that was really the thing that kind of helped me really grasp Meteor, because before that, like I'd only ever worked with WordPress and similar things like that, and that was what really helped me just kind of understand how data moves around. So yeah, Discover Meteor would still be kind of my default suggestion, because I'm not too familiar with getting started resources on Meteor. But and the other thing is actually guide.meteor.com, which is like we use the project structure that they kind of outline in that as our boilerplate. Like that's how all of our apps are actually built. But it's also a great guide on how to build a Meteor app, especially with being able to use ES6 modules, which I don't think Discover Meteor covers, but the guide is going to cover things like that to actually build a Meteor app.
This is your chance also to plug your blog posts as well.
Yeah. If you want some awesome top of the web blog posts, check out Medium. There's some. It's typically more, Meteor as the server. That's essentially all I use it for now. Mostly because I haven't built a web app in a year and a half now. It's all been React Native, but yeah, there's a lot of blog posts there.
Check it out. Are you doing a web app, or like a mobile app?
It's a web application for the Galway Junior Film Flat.
Okay.
So it's a local film festival, Spencer, that we're doing at the minute. So Jim might be able to figure a bit more on what we're doing.
Yeah, it's just it's more or less a central management type system where film creators, directors mostly, have a central platform to upload their movies and any information associated with their films and stuff like that. Because right now they have no central platform for submitting films for the festival, and they're still using Dropbox or Vimeo and stuff like that, or they're still actually mailing in hard copies of films, and they just haven't had. I have a friend that works for them, and they just haven't had the money or resources to actually develop a proper management system that handles that. And so we kind of took that on as our class project for the year, and also to be able to hopefully archive data and stuff like that, and be able to purchase tickets and things like that off of it. So yeah.
Yeah, I suppose down the road, once we get that finished, I suppose React Native might be something really interesting we could do to make a cross-platform mobile application for them. You know?
Yeah. I mean, that sounds really interesting. It's always funny kind of diving into industries that, you know, are, I don't want to say behind, but don't use these pieces of technology that we've just gotten so accustomed to, living kind of in a more technical world. But yeah, if a mobile side is kind of, you know, remotely valuable, I definitely suggest checking out React Native, because of one, you guys will be familiar with JavaScript from working on the Meteor web app. I don't know. I came from being a web developer, just being able to actually build a real mobile app, because React Native it's not like a web app kind of wrapped up in a web view, like something Cordova does. But like being able to build a real mobile app with JavaScript was a really powerful experience, because I tried to learn Objective-C and Java and Swift in the past, and like it just never clicked. I didn't really understand the process of building a native app. But yeah, learning with React Native was a really, really, really cool experience for me.
And you also have been using your template as well, by the way, Spencer, your React Native template, you know, with Meteor on it as well. So thank you very much for that. You have a GitHub page, which is like a nice template to, you know, check out, and then you have your app set up straight away, you know, with the Meteor section, the React Native section. So just get you up and running quickly as well. I'll send you the details after. So, any other questions, guys? Okay, well, listen, Spencer, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. We all really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was fun. I'm still learning how to do these live presentations, but every time I do one, I definitely enjoy it. So
we look forward to the album coming out as well. So just keep updated, yeah.
Thanks, Spencer.
Okay, thanks so much.
thanks, guys.
See you later.
Pretty exciting. Yeah.